Hey guys, okay, let's start Unit 11, Respiration and Gas Exchange. Now, when we're talking about respiration, a lot of our initial instinct is to go, oh yeah, breathing. Do not think breathing just yet. That's going to be gas exchange, where we understand the pathways of how air comes into our bodies, like the poster that I have behind me. For respiration, we are thinking about on a chemical level inside of each of our cells. So respiration in the form of a chemical process that involves the breakdown of nutrients in order to release energy that's stored within the bonds of these molecules. The breaking of those bonds of what is coming in for the glucose and oxygen that we are taking in, when we break down the bonds of those and have them rearranged, that is where we are absorbing energy. And the breaking of the bonds is controlled by enzyme reactions, okay? Two types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic respiration means there is oxygen present in the cells to use to combine with glucose, form a cellular reaction, and to release carbon dioxide and water. Anaerobic respiration means there is no oxygen present, and we'll talk about the differences of both here in just a second. But ultimately, respiration is occurring in all of our cells for us to ultimately survive. And there are several different uses of energy in our bodies of why we have to have respiration. But also note that respiration is occurring for the most part in the mitochondria of your cells. So if you're asked, where does respiration occur within the cells of the human body? Mitochondria would be where you need to note that on let's say an exam or a question on an exam that you're writing in the answer. Now, for uses of respiration in the body, we have a nice little depiction here. Maintaining constant body temperature, also known as homeostasis, cell division and growth, active transport, the passage of nerve impulses, muscle contraction, as well as protein synthesis, which is the creation of proteins from amino acids, which we'll look into in a few weeks, and it's one of my favorite areas that we get to study this year. Okay, we need to make sure that we understand the equation for respiration, and it is in word form: glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide plus water. So this is what's happening within the mitochondria, within your cells, if it is aerobic respiration, so oxygen being present, okay? So oxygen allows the chemical reaction to take place to break down the nutrient molecules to release energy, okay? So we have glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide plus water. You'll also be required to know the chemical equation for this. So make sure you know that glucose is C6H12O6 plus oxygen, 6O2, yields 6CO2, the carbon dioxide, plus water, 6H2O. C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields 6CO2 plus 6H2O. Make sure you look over it. I know in the photosynthesis unit, you can see that they're just flip-flopped, and we created I sang a little jangle for you. Maybe that helps, okay? Now, this is a neat little exam tip we'll go over. 3 marks are given for aerobic respiration, the chemical equation in an exam. 1 for giving the correct formula for glucose and oxygen, 1 for getting the correct formula for carbon dioxide and water, and 1 for balancing the equation correctly. So as long as you can do the letters with the numbers on them, so like a C6H12O6 and O2, so if you can do that part, you get a mark. If you can do CO2 plus H2O, you would get a mark. And then if you can balance it, so it's C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields 6CO2 plus 6H2O, getting the numbers in front correct, okay? All right, moving on to anaerobic respiration. Let me find it here in the notes. For anaerobic respiration, this is respiration that does not require oxygen. So there are times in our body where you are not going to have the resource of oxygen present and available. Typically, this is with intense and heavy exercise. So when we do not have oxygen available, our body can kick into anaerobic respiration on a cellular level. So what this means is it's a chemical reaction in cells that break down nutrient molecules to release energy without using oxygen. It's the incomplete breakdown of glucose and releases just a relatively small amount of energy for use in cell processes. It produces a different breakdown of products depending on the type of organism that it is taking place in. And that we need to also note that the equations for anaerobic respiration in humans and the microorganism yeast are going to be a little bit are going to be different for us. Okay, so when we look at that equation, glucose is going to be broken down into lactic acid for anaerobic respiration in animals. So this would occur when we are doing vigorous and heavy exercise because our muscles have a higher demand for energy than when we're resting or just exercising normally. So we cannot deliver enough oxygen to our muscle cells for aerobic respiration to take place. So our body must use anaerobic respiration. Now, as much glucose as possible is broken down with oxygen, and some glucose is broken down without it, producing lactic acid instead. There's still energy stored within the bonds of the lactic acid molecules that the cell could use, and for this reason, less energy is released when glucose is broken down anaerobically. Okay. Now, in a few videos, we'll talk about the lactic acid and the oxygen debt and what's going on when we have that. But we also have anaerobic respiration in yeast, which is different than in our body. So just to touch on that, yeast is part of a process that takes on anaerobic respiration to use in bread making, also brewing. So let's look at that equation. Glucose is broken down to form alcohol plus carbon dioxide. So this is why bread rises, okay? So if you've ever made any kind of, really any baked anything where you had some batter and you poured it into, or had a dough and put it on anything, and it started out small, and then as it baked, it grew and grew and grew. So it's from this, an anaerobic respiration and yeast equation, where you have sugar breaking down to form alcohol plus carbon dioxide. Also note the chemical equation, C6H12O6 yields 2C2H5OH plus 2CO2. Alrighty, we can do a comparison of aerobic and anaerobic respiration. You can pause it here. It'll also be in your notes. But from here, just make sure you are taking notes, moving on to your CFU, and we'll check back in tomorrow for gas exchange. All right, good job, guys.